you go. All right, welcome back. And we're looking at Revelation chapter 12 today, focusing primarily on the first 6 verses. There's a lot to cover here. Let's get a quick recap. The 7th trumpet has just been blown. That was back in chapter 11. And so now we're coming in announcing this. This is the final trumpet. This is the one that's going to be bringing in the final judgment of God, to bring all things together, to bring the full punishment against the wickedness, to bring a full salvation to the people of God. But after it's blown, it doesn't come just yet. There are first some signs that are given to us. You'll notice in this passage, it begins with a great sign appears in heaven. And you're going to see a drama unfolding. So again, we're not, as we read Revelation, he's not chronicling the history of the future, so to speak. It's a drama unfolding with these signs and these visions. And in this scene here, it's really interesting. He kind of pulls back a little bit and recaps the whole drama, in a sense, of the scriptures, of the Bible, of world history. And we're going to see it in this scene here, of this sign in heaven of a woman and of a dragon and of a child. So there's a lot going on in just these 6 verses. That's why we're going to only focus on those 6. So let's take a look at those here. And Rob, if you wouldn't mind, would you start us off here and read that first 6 verses for us?
Sure. Just one other thing. For those of you who get our daily bread, today's devotional was on 11:15 through 19.
Oh, no.
I think it did a really good job, and it bangs on the verse in 15 where he will reign forever and ever, and handles Messiah, how it uses that verse, and it's really good. So it's worth reading if you have our daily bread for today in line of this study. Yeah. So anyway,
and that was his last scene. Before that, when the 7th trumpet blew, it's like they give praise to God. He reigns forever. And then there's the temple is open, and you could see the ark. And then there's flashes of lightnings, rumblings, peals of thunder, earthquake, and heavy hail. These 2 scenes. Every time God's glory is revealed, the joy and the pleasure of his saints, of salvation, of coming into the presence of God, but also the terrors to the world, to the wicked, that their time is up. So with that, let's take a look at Revelation 12, 1 to 6.
First 6, okay. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, she might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days.
All right. Well, there's a lot here to unpack. I want to first get some images down here. The big question is, well, who's the woman? So who are the characters first? We have the woman mentioned first. Who's the next character mentioned in this?
Dragon.
We have a dragon. So we got a woman, we got a dragon, and then
Stars.
Well, they're not necessarily characters in it. Well, yeah, you're right. What's on 1/3 of the stars are swept down. Good, we'll give you that. Yeah, the stars of heaven that are cast to earth.
Child.
And a child. I think that's it, right? So we got to figure out who those 4 characters are: the woman, the dragon, the stars, and the child. So let's talk about that. A great sign appears in heaven. What do we know about the woman here? What does it say about her? How does it describe her?
Clothed with sun and the moon under her feet.
All right, so he gives a few descriptions of her. First, she's clothed with the sun. Let me pull this down here. Sorry about that. What'd I do? She's clothed with the sun. Let me pull that one more time. Technical difficulties here. Before we move on from there, what does that mean? Is clothed with the sun? We have. What do you suppose that means here?
She's really bright. She's real, like she's glowing.
Yeah. This is. I don't know why I'm having trouble today with this here. Sorry about this. She's glowing. She's clothed with the sun. Where have we seen the sun in Revelation before, referencing the sun, the
Face
sun?
of Jesus.
Face of
Lamb.
Christ. If you remember, if you go back to Revelation 1:16, he was described to us here, and let's read that description one more time. In fact, I might want to read that whole section here because I think it informs our passage here. So let's see. Bob, would you mind reading that for us here? The verses 12 to 16 first. We'll start there.
Okay. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in full strength.
Yeah, there's the first mention of the sun, that the face of Christ was like the sun shining in full strength. And what do you remember? If you remember what that meant, that his face was shining in full strength when he's looking at John. Well, let's start off with
Was
this. Yeah, go ahead.
Wasn't it like comforting and warm?
Yeah, it's a sign. If you remember the blessing from Numbers, where God says, "May the Lord bless you and keep you. May His face shine upon you, and give you peace." And yeah, it's His full to be shining in full strength was just this, looking on John with just this full acceptance and peace, and really he is His. And so, keep that in mind. So now you have this woman who is clothed with the sun. Whoever this person is, or whatever this person is, what can you assume about her? Is she someone in good standing with God?
Yes. The countenance is shining on her in a sense.
Yeah. And she's clothed with the sun. And that phrase clothed is often used in the scriptures regarding how we're clothed in Christ's righteousness. And they're constantly clothed with linens and covering their shame. And it's a very important concept in the scriptures of how that's what we're acceptable to the Lord. So she's clothed with the sun. So the full pleasure of God and her, she is in right relationship with Him. And the next thing is that the moon is under her feet. In the Bible, they're not again. This keeps doing this to me. Sorry, it's not letting me do this to save my notes. So in the Bible, what does that mean, that phrase, under your feet?
Have
Have power.
command over them.
Yeah, you have command over. There's a Psalm 8, right? You've put all things under His feet, given Him dominion over all the earth regarding mankind. So she is sitting, so she is clothed with the sun. She has the full grace of God and pleasure in her, and acceptance to God is there. She is clearly someone blessed. And she also rules in that under her feet, the moon has been put on her feet. There's a couple of phrases that are used about that. What was the moon, by the way? What was the significance of the moon in the Bible?
Isn't it the light of the night?
It is the moon has been given, if you remember in Genesis, that he let's go back to the creation of the moon. It's in Genesis 1. And let's see, who's just coming on here. Hey, Elizabeth.
Hi, Mike. Michael. Hi, everyone.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
All right, so in day 4, he makes the great lights. So let's read that real quick here. Jack, would you mind reading that for us? This is Genesis 1, 14 to 19.
And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 4th day.
So what is the moon? What's the job of the moon in this creation passage here?
To give light at night.
To give light, true, but
No.
more than that,
To rule the night.
to rule the night. So the sun rules the day and the moon rules the night. In a sense, you could say that the moon is the prince of darkness, if you could say that. He's the ruler of the night. And then you have the stars. The stars are there as well, which is kind of setting up the battle so that the woman is clothed with the sun, but then the moon is under her feet, which reminds me of a passage about under your feet. In Romans 16, remember this passage?
Mhm.
Romans 16:20, where it says, the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with you. We also had in Genesis 3, we have a reference. What was this, the 3:15 about the woman and the serpent? Remember that?
The curse.
Yeah, the curse, right?
Head.
So this drama of a woman and a dragon and a child should remind you of Genesis 3 in the Garden of Eden. There you have a woman encountering not a dragon, but a serpent, which is likened to a dragon. And we're told actually the dragon is that ancient serpent a little bit later on. And the promise, if you remember, was, Elizabeth, would you get this for us? Verse
Sure.
14 and 15, when the Lord speaks to the serpent after the curse.
Okay. The Lord said, the Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel."
So now you have this scene. You have the woman,
Mm.
you have the serpent, and then you have the son of the woman, this child, this offspring coming, and then how he will, bruise your head and you will bruise his heel, being under his feet. So it's an interesting passage here that kind of brings up this scene from Genesis 3. But now it speaks to her. One more thing about the woman. So she's clothed with the sun. she rules over the moon under her feet. And then in Revelation 12, there's one more thing that's said about her,
Crown of 12 stars.
the crown of 12 stars. Now, the crown there, the word for crown is, that is Stephanos. That's the victory wreath. It's not a that of a king having dominion, but one who is overcome and who has won the race gets the victory wreath. The diadem, which we'll see with the dragon, is the one for kings. So, what's the significance of 12 stars?
12 tribes of of Israel.
12 tribes of Israel. Yeah.
God's people.
Yeah. 12 is the number of God's people. So when you see 12s in Revelation, especially, you're dealing with the elect, God's people, believers, the true believers. We're not talking about just, those who call themselves Jews or Christians, but those who truly have faith in Christ. And so this woman, she has this victory crown of these 12 stars. So now we begin to think, all right, who is this person, or what does she represent? So let's think about that for a second here.
I think it's faithful Israel.
Faithful Israel.
I fit that thought into that picture.
Yeah. There is one more passage of scripture that references the moon, the sun, and 12 stars. There is a famous story that references all those elements in it. I don't know if you remember what it is. It's back in Genesis. In Genesis 37. Let's take a look at that. And it's in Joseph's dream.
All right. Yeah.
Remember that. I want to take a look at that. Joseph's dream, verses 5 to 11. And Raymond, would you mind reading that for us?
Yeah. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he had told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brother said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have a dream, another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow down ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept this saying in mind.
Yeah. So he has this dream, and the second dream, which is the sun and the moon and 11 stars. And how does Jacob interpret that dream of what's the meaning of the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars?
Well, the remaining brothers are going to bow before him, Joseph being one of the 12 brothers.
Yeah. So the 12 brothers are your 12 stars. And then who's the sun? Who's the moon?
Jacob and his wife.
Yeah. Jacob and your mother is the son of the moon who brought forth these 12 stars, so to speak. And one star is lifted up and they're to be bowing over them, but that they are described in these terms of light. Sorry, some feedback there. There we go.
Please call me within the next 24.
Yeah.
And your final,
But you, there we go.
you can call me at 771.
Okay, thanks. All right. I had to mute you for a second there, Elizabeth. That you had a machine coming on, so sorry about that.
Pastor, I'm still running through my head there with God placing the moon and it being the prince of darkness out there. So is that just one interpretation, or do you feel that that's really what he had done there?
Well, no, I don't, the moon is not evil. But just that it's symbolic of, that's why the moon often is symbolic of evil things, like the full moon, that's the werewolves coming out for the full moon sort of thing. And a lot of the pagan idolatries really have a special place for the moon because it is that which has been given the rule over the darkness. The moon is the ruler of the darkness. And so it can be used in those ways. So when I think in our passage in Revelation 12, that the woman there saying that the moon was under her feet suggests that she has dominion over the moon. And it makes sense that the moon in that context is sort of perhaps could be a reference to the powers of darkness, that she has the crushing, the enemies go under your feet.
Is it also sort of, she's using the moon as her footstool?
Yeah. And he will use the God says he sits at the heaven is his throne, earth is his footstool, right? You have, but the Christ at the end, it talks about he will rule the nation with a rod of iron, and the Lord will make your enemies a footstool for you. You will crush them. They'll be under your feet. So to be under someone's feet is to be, in a war context, it is to be defeated.
Yeah, the king would stand on somebody's neck.
Yeah. So I think in this context here, describing the moon as under her feet, and that knowing that the sun sort of we've seen is the radiance of God's glory clothing her in this, the sun is the king of the day. And remember, in the new heavens and the new earth, there is no more night. There is no night. And that this dark realm, the moon sort of is symbolic of the enemies, the evil spiritual enemies that she has been given authority over, in a sense, or conquered and come through. Her head is a crown, again, that victory crown of overcoming, and the 12 stars of God's people. She is that it is reminiscent of Joseph's dream. It's not precise, but it's reminiscent of it, the sun, the moon, and the stars. And Joseph's story is exactly the story of this woman, one who is of God's people, pleasing to the Lord, clothed with the sun, and yet one who will be, as we're going to see next, betrayed, left for dead, slandered, just attacked, and yet preserved and rescued, and then exalted to a high place to bring salvation to the world. So the woman is in question is, there are some who take this as, is this Eve, this woman? Is it Mary, the woman? Sometimes pictures of Mary will display her as the Queen of Heaven with 12 stars around her head. But I don't think you can go and look at that and say, this is Mary. I mean, she is pregnant with the child, might suggest that. But this is an allegory. This is something much bigger than a single person.
We know the Messiah is a Jew. He comes out of from the Jews. He's of the Jews.
Yeah. So what you see is that it's a pregnant woman. And what's the last thing we are told about her in verse 2? What else are we told about her?
Just giving
Just
birth and crying out.
Crying out in birth.
The agony.
Yeah. She's pregnant and she's crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And that reminds us of, remember how in Romans 8, I believe, talks about it, how all creation is crying out in the pains of birth for the sons of God to be revealed. So there's this painful thing. And you do see that where, when Jesus does arrive and is given birth, this is a painful scene, isn't it? If you remember what happens, the part of the nativity that we always leave out, You remember that in Matthew chapter 2? Very important part of the nativity story that we typically leave out of our pageants. You don't remember this? Okay. Let's take a look. Matthew 2. What happens after the wise men leave?
Oh,
They-
Herod declares that all children under the age of 2 will be
Two.
put.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's this awful scene of the slaughter of the innocents in Bethlehem. And it describes it as the voice heard in Ramah, weeping in loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. In a sense, this is the birth pains. This is part of the birth pains of him entering the world, and then his fleeing to Egypt under persecution. You can see all these things happening here. So the woman in Revelation 12, I think, Rob, you're right, that this is a reference to God's faithful people. The church, we could say, if you look at Hebrews 11, it talks about those people who had faith, going back to all the way back to Abel. And so it's all the people before Christ even came who had faith, who were genuinely trusted in the Lord. These are his faithful people. Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Rahab, and Sarah, and all the rest.
I was wondering about that because of the 12 stars in her crown.
Yeah.
You know, the stars were the angels of the church.
Yeah, the stars are the angels in church. So it's a heavenly scene. You'll notice, remember, this sign is in heaven. So it's a spiritual vision he's having. And so we need to think about that in the spiritual realm here, the way that God's people are described in the spiritual realm, like Joseph and his brothers are stars in the heavenly realms. Their lights, their lampstands on earth, their stars in heaven. And so the star analogy there, I think, is the 12 is the important number there. Remind, this is God's people here, truly his people from the heavenly perspective. The Lord knows those who are his. So these are not the 12 tribes.
And I think it's interesting. This may be going a little bit off the path we're on, but when Jesus chose his apostles, he chose 12 apostles.
Yes, exactly right.
And then, of course, Judas, then it diminished to 11 after Judas did his thing.
Yeah. And they had to bring it back up to 12 before they
Right.
could come out, right?
Yes.
So the 12 is very important. And in this, again, this is not the 12 tribes. These are the 12 stars. So it's truly God's people. Like the 144,000 are not from the 12 tribes. Do you remember that list?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a strange
Yeah.
list. That's not a normal list of 12 tribes. It's written that way to remind you these are the faithful ones.
I think Romans 11 is very important, it seems like to me here, because it clearly says that through faith, that Gentiles are grafted into Israel, into the chosen people. So we're part of the chosen people. So if this image, this woman is faithful Israel, that includes all of God's people. It's not just Jews. It's his people.
I think you have a case to be made. This is Eve, in a sense. She is the mother. It's the son of the woman. She's the mother of all living, we're told. That's why she's called Eve. And so it's like the faithful come from her, and she's the one interacting with the serpent. She's the one who feels the first pains of birth. And so you have this, it's very symbolic. It is God's, all the children of the woman. So I want to come back to this here. The Genesis 3, I really think is so important in understanding the drama of the Bible. Because after the fall, we're given this battle, this enmity between the serpent and the woman. That's the battle. The rest of the Bible is about the battle between the serpent and the woman, and between the offspring of the serpent and the offspring of the woman. So you're going to see throughout the scriptures this this tension, this battle and conflict between those who are children of the serpent and those who are children of the woman. And we're not talking about biological bloodlines here, but the spiritual descendants. So for example, what's the next story after Genesis 3? We have Genesis 4. What's that story?
Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel. Who's the son of the woman in this story?
Both.
In this story, well, physically, both of them are, but spiritually, which one belongs to the woman and which one belongs to the serpent?
Abel is. the
Abel
woman.
is,
Abel belongs to the woman and Cain belongs to the serpent.
Exactly right. Cain belongs to the serpent. He's the one who attacks his brother, who is given over to sin and kills his brother. And Abel is the righteous one, pleasing to God. He is the son of the woman. He's the gentle one. He is the keeper of the flock. He's not the aggressor here. And in the end, it's Abel who, though he dies, rises again in Seth. And Cain, he is doomed. He is the line of humanity that is completely wiped out in the flood. There are no, after Noah, there's no descendants from Cain. So that's the next one. And then you keep going on, and you see that. You see it later on with Noah. Noah has a few sons, right? And two in particular is Ham and Shem.
Shem.
And Ham is the one who's cursed by Noah because he saw his nakedness and tried to humiliate him. And Shem is the righteous one who covers it, and he's blessed. And throughout, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau. When we get to the Exodus, you have this conflict between Moses and
Pharaoh.
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 Aaron.
There's
Pharaoh-
forever, there's forever two groups.
Yeah. And Pharaoh, is it a coincidence that what does Pharaoh have on his crown?
The
Serpent.
serpent.
He has a serpent on his crown, right? Isn't that amazing? As if to make sure we understand who the players are here. And throughout this, you're going to have these battles. The evil one is presented as, I mean, think about this battle that's about to rage. It's between a pregnant woman and a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. Who's going to win this fight? You know,
A woman.
it just, I mean, that's the amazing part of it, is like the woman is the picture of vulnerability and weakness here. And but she does have a baby. So there you go. So that a woman and her baby are facing off against a 7-headed dragon, given with all kinds of authority. I mean, in the worldly perspective, this is impossible, but that's the battle rages. And the woman, though she is the son of the woman, though he is stricken by the serpent, is victorious in the end. He always crushes the serpent in the end. So he kind of takes that narrative and kind of brings it out to a cosmic scale here. Instead of just a scene in a garden, now it's a cosmic battle.
So you're saying that you think the woman is Eve?
I would say this, that it goes back to Eve, but the woman is all of those who believed up to the coming of Christ, and even thereafter, in a sense, you could say. You have later on it's a fascinating analogy, but the Christ comes from this. There's this faithful line, in it's not necessarily a bloodline, but a spiritual line, so to speak. And I think we have to kind of recognize that. We get caught up in blood and genealogies, and we need to be careful with that. There's a spiritual Israel here. There's a spiritual thing. So that's why Paul says in Romans, not all Israel is Israel.
Right.
You know, not everyone who has the blood of Abraham is part of God's chosen people, God's people here. It's faith that matters.
It was just that recently I've heard Mary referred to as the new Eve and the new Rachel.
Yeah, that's a common refrain. And there is definitely links between all of them. Rachel, Mary, and Eve. They have so much in common biblically. But I would argue they are all sort of representative of God's faithful people. They're being presented. That's why he doesn't give the name. He doesn't say, "I saw Mary."
Hmm.
No, he just says a woman.
No, right.
Yeah, he sees a woman. And that's very much an analogy of the church. How many times the church is described as a woman? In Ephesians 5, it's the wife who represents the church to Christ, who's the husband, So in many ways that the church is identified as a woman. And you can see it because the women's are the more vulnerable. They're not the ones coming in, raping and pillaging and dominating. They're the ones bringing life into the world. Life comes through the woman. Salvation comes through the woman. And so, and they're constantly in danger and under attack from evil and wicked forces. And this is what's so irritating. Even today, I would say, what you're seeing in today's culture is a war on women. It is an absolute war on women. The whole notion of femininity is despised. If you've noticed this,
Oh, yeah.
that all the women are basically told you have to become like men,
Right.
and then what happens is men become the best women in the world. So, Bruce Jenner becomes the woman of the year, and Leah Thomas becomes the best woman swimmer and sports woman of the year. It's just crazy how there is this continual attack on women. And I think it's part of the spiritual warfare we're dealing with. The woman carries the message of salvation to us, of that life. Salvation comes through the agony of pain and death and suffering brings forth this life. And I think that's not through the power of the man, but through the suffering of the woman. And so I think that's where that suffering of that weakness, that suffering of the woman is so despised in the world today. And you're seeing it under continual attack. And I see that transgender movement is really, it's the one thing that seems to have in common. They all just hate women. That's a side note, but it's kind of connected. So let's take a look here. So that's our first sign. So he sets up the whole drama here with a woman clearly in the pleasure of God, clothed with the sun, and in a position of splendor and a crown of 12 stars. And but she's also pregnant and she's in pain and ready to give birth. And then another sign appears. Let's read that sign here. Let's see here, where we leave off here. Teresa, are you up for reading, or is that going to be a problem?
Oh,
Okay. All right. Would you take it verses 3 to 6?
mhm. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he devoured it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with an iron rod. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is nourished for 1260 days.
Great. All right. Now he sees another sign. And in this sign, it appears in heaven, he sees a great red dragon. Okay. So immediately when you hear that phrase, who are we dealing with here? A great red dragon.
Satan,
Okay.
This is Satan. If you're not sure about that, you go down to here. I believe it's in next verse, the dragon. We're told in verse 9, the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan. So it's pretty clear that the dragon is the devil, is the Satan, the the true prince of darkness here. And he's described as having, first, there are three things said about him in that verse 3. First,
7 heads,
all right, he's got 7 heads. All right, 7 heads. The number 7, what's the number 7?
That's God's.
Be complete or
It is God's number, isn't it? Yeah, okay. That is the number belonging to God, right? 7 heads. What are heads in this? What's the significance of heads? Let's take a look. And then 7 diadems, which is the crown. So,
Right, so of the heads, 7 different kings.
so that's a good question. So we're dealing with authority here. We're dealing with kings and nations and such, right? So we keep that in mind. So this is 7 diadems. So it's it's not, we're not going to take it as a literal number here, but a couple ways we might want to consider it is that this authority that the dragon has is not something that in a sense that's been God ordained, has been given to him by God. And you're going to see that in the scriptures where Satan says that about to Jesus when he tempts him. Remember that? He says, I'll give you the nations for they've been given to me. You remember that?
Yeah.
That in a sense that was not something he stole, but when this world fell into sin, it was given over to the power of the devil. And so he's kind of ruling that. The 10 horns, what do horns represent?
Power,
Is what again?
power, authority.
It is power, yes. The horns of an animal are that's their strength. So 10 is he has got complete strength and authority in these realms here. There is a passage in Daniel 7. I think that would be worth reading because I think it reflects this scene well for us here. So let's turn to Daniel 7. Daniel has a vision of the 4 beasts. And let's take that. And Rob, I'm going to start back with you again here. Would you read that for us, verses 1 to 8?
Okay. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, arise, devour much flesh. After this, I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things.
Okay. So Daniel has this vision of 4 beasts. It's similar to the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron. Now the 4 beasts, I don't know if you know what they all represent. He's going to explain it later on in the chapter, but if you remember on your own here, so the first was a lion that had eagle's wings. Who was the lion that had eagle's wings? Remember
That
that one?
one,
One of the seraphim?
Yeah, the lion in this context was, that beast was representative of Babylon, the emperor, and Nebuchadnezzar was the one who was humbled and became like a man for a time. If you remember that, when he was cast out until he praised God. Okay, that was the lion. But then the next three beasts are very interesting. And it's interesting, they're referenced, they use some references in each of these that are found with this dragon. So the next beast, the bear, is raised up on one side, had 3 ribs in its mouth, between its teeth, was told, arise, devour much flesh. You know, the bear was, by the way,
Medo-Persia.
Medo-Persia, right? And it says he was raised up on one side, meaning that one side of the bear was bigger than the other, because the Persians were bigger than the Medes. They were a joint empire. They were the ones who defeated the Babylonians. They took over, and he's told to devour much flesh, which is what the dragon is doing or trying to do in Revelation 12, to devour the child. But now we move to the next one, and that's the leopard with 4 wings on its back. And who was the leopard with 4 wings?
Greece.
That was Greece, and particularly Alexander, and the 4 wings, the 4 kings that came after him. The leopards are known for their speed, and that was the fastest defeat of an empire we've ever seen, where Alexander just goes like crazy and takes over all of Persia in a few years. And you see it had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Just like we saw, this dragon has 7 heads, dominion is given to it as well. But then there's a 4th beast, a terrifying beast with iron teeth, and that's representing
Rome.
comes after Greece is Rome, right? And that one is known for the 10 horns. In this context, the 10 horns are these 10 kings, it seems, who will be boasting great things. So there's elements of each of these beasts in the dragon. The dragon is mentioned, his heads, his horns, and the fact that he wants to devour the child is sort of one element from each of those 3 here after this. So they're kind of putting it together for us that, in a sense, the dragon is the entity behind the beasts. All these beasts, these empires of earth that were dominating the world, but the dragon is really the one behind it all, who is moving this, inspiring them to do these things. So coming back to our passage here, we come down to the next passage, verse 4, that the tail of the dragon swept down 1/3 of the stars. So what does that mean? What do you suppose that's about?
Sounds like when Satan took 1/3 of the angels from heaven down to earth with him.
Yeah, this is where we get the idea that he took 1/3 of the angels with him, is from this verse. And you said, are you sure that's what it is? And it may not be clear here, but it does seem to be clear in the next paragraph, when it speaks about how the dragon was thrown down, and not just him, but his angels were thrown down with him. So that seems to be referencing not just his own fall, but that of his angels. And 1/3 of them doesn't mean exactly 1/3, but a portion, a good portion of the angels fell with him in that. All right. So, and then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. So, all right, so the child comes forth, and the dragon seeks to devour it. Okay. Now, who was the child is the next question.
Would it be
Jesus.
Christ?
That's Christ. That's the one we've been waiting for. How do you know it's Christ?
Because the serpent was to try to devour the Christ, but the woman giving birth crushed his heel. he crushed, how'd it go?
Yeah, he'll bruise your head.
Yeah,
He will
right.
bruise your heel. He will crush your head. Yeah. But he says also of this male child that he is the one who is to rule all the
Rule.
nations.
It's
the
Psalm
broad
2.
line. That's Psalm 2. Exactly right. That's a beautiful picture. In fact, that's a great psalm that kind of captures this whole story. But let's go through here. I just want to just chart through the history of the Bible here. Look back at your Old Testament stories. How many times did we see the dragon trying to kill the woman or kill her child? How many times have we seen this? Can you think of times where there was a concerted effort? If the woman represents faithful, God's faithful people, particularly faithful Israel in the Old Testament, how many times have we seen them under duress and in danger of being wiped out?
Jesus and Moses.
All right. So you've got, let's start with Moses for a second. Right? Where was the dragon in that scene in the Moses story?
The Pharaoh.
He's behind Pharaoh, right? Seeking to keep God's people oppressed and then chasing them to the Red Sea, ready to kill them all at the end. That's one chance they had. And you'll notice what happened, how God rescued them miraculously from that. What's another time when God's faithful people were in danger of being wiped out?
Herod.
Right? What that after Jesus is born, he wants to kill him right there. So that's a great example of it.
The whole book of Judges.
Book of Judges, all the oppressed, right? All those nations coming in, oppressing the people. You think of other stories.
When
So many.
when Moses went up onto the mountain to talk to God, and they basically turned and made the golden calf, would that be in the same category? Because basically it seems like Satan got into them, got them to build this golden calf, and then didn't God actually wipe out 1/3 of them?
Yeah, that's interesting. You
Yes.
know, in Revelation, there are two beasts, not just one. And there's the beast, there's the false prophet.
False prophet.
And so there's the one beast who with pure force wants to wipe them out. And then there's the false prophet who wants, in a sense, to deceive them into, remember that was the whole thing of Balaam, right? We can't defeat them, so let's send our women over there and let them defeat themselves, right? It's classic strategy. Yeah. What's another famous story in the Old Testament?
Esther. Yeah.
Yep. There's another example. The Jews were about to be wiped out, folks. That story, and God miraculously rescued them. So throughout, later on, you have Antiochus Epiphanes, which is referenced in Daniel, when the Greeks were ready to wipe them out. So again and again, you see that, and God miraculously preserving his people. And so he's ready to attack, ready to devour. But what happens to her child in verse 5?
God snatches them up into heaven.
Yeah, and to his throne. When did that happen? What's that a reference to?
Jesus' resurrection.
Yeah.
In ascension.
And ascension, right? Exactly.
Ascension.
His resurrection, and then 10 days later, his ascension
His ascension.
to the throne. That's the gospel they proclaimed, was not just that Jesus died for your sins, but also that he rose again, victorious over sin and death, and he ascended to heaven where he sits on the throne. And you need to repent because he's the king. He is the one who rules all the nations now.
I
You
thought it
said
was
10,
40
I'm sure you meant
days.
40 days. Yeah, it's 40 days. That was a mistake.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. It would be, yes, my sorry. It's 10 days between the ascension and Pentecost. Thanks for that correction. 40 days after his resurrection. He ascends. So now the woman, what happens to the woman after she gives birth and the child is caught up?
She
Flees
goes
into
to
the
the wilderness for safety.
She flees into the wilderness. And that's a really interesting scene here because it says she is has a place prepared by God for her, and
Right.
she's nourished for that time.
Mm,
That's a reference to a couple of things. Do you know, there's I have two things in mind where you see God's people fleeing into the wilderness
Mm.
and God providing for them in the wilderness.
Mm.
Can you think of
How
those
about
two?
Jesus? How about Jesus being tempted in the world?
Yes, but he wasn't fleeing persecution when he went.
Okay, okay.
What the scriptures talk about faith.
Israelites,
The scriptures talk about faithful Israel fleeing in the end times into Edom, for example, and that actually when they came into the promised land, God didn't let the Jews smack these people. He preserved them, and some would say they'll point to passages where faithful Israel is protected in these three areas.
Yeah.
Edom,
Yeah. I think this
But-
passage here.
But
Uh,
I was gonna say, God feeding the Israelites manna and quail at night,
Yeah.
you know, when they were fleeing from Egypt.
Exactly. I mean, in fact, it's interesting that Egypt is described as a dragon in the Old Testament. I don't know if you know that. I wanted to show you that real quick. But if you look up like the word dragon in your Bibles here, and you go back and you're going to see that, which passage was it here? The dragon.
right there at
Ezekiel
Ezekiel 29.
Ezekiel 29, behold, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, that great dragon that lies in the midst of the streams. So Egypt is frequently referred to, specifically Pharaoh, in that time as this great red dragon, pursuing God's people, pursuing the woman, and that it's Israel who flees from the dragon, and she flees into the wilderness, into the desert in Sinai. And so where God provides for her for the next 40 years, there's one. There's another story of a faithful man who was fleeing a dragon, so to speak, and into the wilderness where he also was provided for. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Talking about Moses?
It's in 1 Kings 19.
Oh, Elijah. Yeah.
Elijah had, after he has that battle at Mount Carmel, and Jezebel determines to kill him, and it says he flees. He himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. This is 1 Kings 19. And he came and sat there, and then the Lord basically speaks to him and provides for him in that setting. So we have these two scenes of Moses and Elijah again, which Moses and Elijah seem to come up a lot in the book of Revelation, you may have noticed, because they really are, what they have in common is they are two humble men facing an evil empire, is what you're dealing with, and in the darkest of times. And so they really become inspiration for John, because he sees the church, especially at his time, dealing with the same thing as them. And look how God provided for Moses in the wilderness. Look how he provided for Elijah in that time. And they'll be nourished for 1,260 days. We've seen that number before. What's the meaning of that? 3.5 years. And what's the meaning of 3.5?
It's half of the whole number. Half of God's
Yeah.
number.
It's a time cut short. It's not gonna kill you. You're gonna have tribulation for this time. It's gonna be trouble, but it's limited. It's a limited time, and he will provide for them during that time. So
Doesn't Jesus also say that in heaven there are many mansions, God has prepared a place for you?
yep. That's prepared by God, place prepared by God. That phrase, that's a good one. Let me see if you have other places where place prepared. Did you say it there? Prepare. I go to prepare a place for you. I think he says that in John 14, right?
Mhm.
Let me just pull it up. Yeah, but John 14, he says, do not be worried. Why don't you read that for us, Jack? Verses 1 to 7.
Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may also be. And you know the way to where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also.
Hmm.
From now on, you do not know him or have seen him.
Yeah.
You do not know him and have seen him.
So Christ, before the day of his passion, before he suffers for our sins and dies, he goes to prepare a place for us. You're right. I think that's exactly right. So I want to come back to this passage, Revelation 12, 1 to 6. And I just want to pull back on it. And it can get tricky to figure out what all the details mean and the significance of them, but you don't want to miss the main point of it here. Is that here we have this drama of a woman who is pregnant and in great pain, but she is someone who is pleasing to God and is going to be the overcoming in her faith. And then you have this powerful, awesome, unstoppable force in this great red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and all the authority of earth. And not only that, but a third of the stars of heaven cast down with him. And so all his demonic hordes raging against this one poor woman and the child she's about to give birth to. But yet you see the scene and you're amazed at it, because who wins in the end? We're even told in this paragraph, who is the one who will be standing at the end?
Child.
Yeah, that child is the one who is to rule the nations with a rod of iron. So you had better be siding with the right forces here. It doesn't make any sense, but you go and you line up with that pregnant woman and that child, and not with the powers of this world. And the promise we have is that the dragon, the devil, will do all in his power to devour this child and to destroy this woman, but he will not be allowed to. The child will be caught up to the throne, and the woman will flee into the wilderness, and the Lord himself will prepare a place for her and will nourish her during that time. So it's this kind of girding our loins for the trouble. Don't be shaken by the threats, the powers of this world, the evil around us. That look at how God provides, even in the midst of this, until he brings forth his final victory when Christ ascends, takes his throne here on earth. He'll provide for us in the meantime. So with that, I think, as we look at that again, this vision, and I'm going to get to the next vision next week about the war in heaven with Michael and the angels and such, and how he'll kind of switch the analogy a little bit and referring to us as the offspring of the woman, his other offspring. But in any case, I think we can see ourselves as part of the woman here and part of her agony and pain and suffering, but also God's provision for us during that time. So, all right, so we'll break it here. Any last comments or questions or thoughts on it?
I just want to make one comment. When you're talking about the female and the marriage between man and woman, Jesus also calls his church the bride of Christ. When he
Mhm.
comes back, he's coming back to collect his bride.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Which,
Yeah, and Revelation 12 talks about that. It's really interesting. You have now you have later on Revelation, you have a couple of women. You've got the bride and you've got the prostitute too.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of women here to deal with
Yes.
later on.
Mhm.
Yeah. But all
Women,
right.
they're always involved, Pastor. Have you noticed that?
Always the women.
Mm. Oh, man.
So, all right. Very good. Let me stop the recording here.